We are continuing our study on biblical principles of money or finance. It's been 3 weeks, I guess, now since we had our last lesson. So just to remind you, our overall theme here, main thing is, anybody remember what we always talk about? It's not up there this time, so you can't cheat. What's the main statement here?
Jesus saved, and so should you.
Dave is the king of puns. All right, yep.
It's not mine, it's God.
Yep, God owns it all. I'm entrusted with management of it or using it. And so every decision that I make should be hopefully with the goal of pleasing God and using it wisely, right? We talked about from Money Matters, the 5 principles that they give from the Bible. I'm going to read a couple of verses here just to start us off, and then we'll incorporate as we go here. But this is just, again, reiterating what we've already talked about quickly here. Proverbs 21:20. He who pursues righteousness and loyalty finds life. Did I get that wrong? No, life, righteousness, and honor. That is wrong. Where am I? I read it just a moment ago, but that doesn't sound like what I read. 20, yeah, I read 21. There is precious treasure and oil in the dwelling of the wise, but a foolish man swallows it up. All right, there we go. That was more what I was looking for. And then 22:7, the rich rules over the poor, and the borrower becomes the lender's slave. So those were a couple of passages that we read that deal with those 5 principles. The first principle that they say is get out of debt. Now, I don't always subscribe to everything that Dave Ramsey says, but as far as what he considers the only debt you should ever get into is a mortgage. There may be, as we mentioned, there may be other times that you might go into debt for other things, but if you're following his principles, mortgage is it. We said act your age, which was wrong. It's actually act your wage. That means don't spend more than you make. Get on a budget. That's what we're going to be talking about today. Budgeting is very important, unless you have more money than you need. And even then, it's still important. Save and invest. Jimmy followed up a little bit on, we talked a little bit about that 5 weeks ago, and then Jimmy followed up on that, or 4 weeks ago, and then Jimmy followed up on that 3 weeks ago, gave a little bit more. I don't remember where we're at exactly, but anyway, 2 weeks ago, 1 week ago, whatever it was, yeah. And then give as the 5th principle. So those are the real quick principles that they pull out of the scriptures. I read a couple of those scriptures. We'll read a couple more as we go through here to deal with that. Then, of course, we went through several general principles that I gave in relation to money. And then we talked about the effect of debt and what you want to do with that. And also then, of course, investing and saving and compound interest and all of that sort of stuff. Last lesson that I taught, we were dealing with analyzing your financial condition. If you guys remember that, we started that off by reading Luke 14, and we're going to do that here real quick again, because this applies both to that lesson and to today's lesson. Luke 14, 26 through 33. If one of you guys wants to read that.
If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which one of you, when he wants to build a tower, does not first sit down and calculate the cost to see if he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he had laid the foundation and is not able to finish, all who observe it begin to ridicule him, saying, "This man began to build and was not able to finish." Or what king, when he sets out to meet another king in battle, will not first sit down and consider whether he is strong enough with 10,000 men to encounter one coming against him with 20,000? Or else, While the other is still far away, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. So then, none of you can be my disciple who does not give up all his own possessions.
All right, so Jesus, of course, teaches in parables, as we know, and he often uses money to relate to spiritual things. So here he's talking about counting the spiritual cost, right, of being his disciple. Don't jump in without realizing what it's going to cost you. And then he talks about giving up the money part of it. Of course, he talks about thinking through whether you have enough money to build a building before you start the construction, or else what happens. And what the example did I use, if you guys remember, I've used it a couple times now. You guys, because it's very prominent in this area, Noah's Ark, it's not Noah's Ark, the Ark, the church, whatever it's called, the Ark of the Church of Ark, or whatever it is. You guys know the thing sitting out there on the highway that's partially finished and has been partially finished for, I don't know how many years, as long as I can remember. So obviously they did not count the cost before they started building that, right? So that actually, I mean, it serves both the purpose of talking about wise use of money and also the cost of what it's going to cost us to follow Jesus, right? Now then he talks about giving up all of our possessions, and we've talked about this before. Does that mean that all of us need to go out and sell everything we have right now? At least I think I've said this before. If I haven't, I'm going to say it now. Obviously not, because if everybody sold their possessions all at once, what would happen? We'd all be broke. We wouldn't have anything more. There wouldn't be anybody to carry on the function of the church. You wouldn't be able to take care of yourself. That's not what he's talking about. So keep that in mind. He's talking about, well, I won't say exactly what he's talking about here, but in general, when it comes to that kind of statement where it's like, don't worry about the future, don't save for the future, that kind of thing. He's not saying, like, don't do it. He's saying, don't put your emphasis there. That's not the most important thing. But you have to couple it with the other principles of taking care of yourself, taking care of your family, helping others, all those kind of things, which we can't do if we sold everything we had. Like that we can't do it. So you got to put the principles together in order for it to make sense, right? In order for it to work. So don't take one statement out of here and just, oh, that's what we got to do, and then you're in trouble. It's just like whenever the church started, in Acts there, and they sold their possessions. That doesn't mean they didn't do that forever, clearly, because then what happens later on? They take up a collection. The churches start taking up a collection to help the congregation in Jerusalem, right? So we know that's the way it operated. That was a special circumstance that they were taking care of each other, because what was happening at that point? There were a lot of people in Jerusalem that didn't live there, that weren't from there, and they were taking care of each other during the beginning part of the church there. Anyway, I got off on a tangent. I wasn't meaning to go down that way. But we got to count the costs. And so that's part of analyzing your financial condition, knowing where you're at. Now, we talked about what is an asset. You guys remember what an asset is? It's something you own. So it can be cash, it can be gold, it can be jewelry, something that has value that you own. It can be your house, it can be your car, although car might fall more in the liability side of things. Yeah, but it can have value depending on what it is. So those are assets. You have to know what your assets are. You have to know what your liabilities are. What's a liability? If you own an asset, you owe money on it, right? So what would a liability be? Well, the one liability that you're allowed to have, according to Ramsey, would be the mortgage. Children would be the mortgage. But it would be any other kind of debt that you owe to someone, so like a loan or whatever. And you could also argue that actually debt might be, this gets a little confusing and I don't want to confuse people, but you could call your things that you owe as liabilities. When you're coming up with a budget, like what you owe for this month, right? So that's kind of a liability. Not necessarily, a liability in a technical term is something you actually owe, at this point, you know how much it is. You may not know exactly how much your electric bill is going to be next month, And you may not owe it just yet, but if you're living and you're still living in your house, you know you're going to owe it. So you might consider that a liability. Anyway, so we talked about analyzing that and coming up with basically what would be your statement of financial condition. If it's a business, you'd call that a balance sheet. Assets minus liabilities equals net worth. Net worth is how much you're above or below, depending on whether you have more assets or more liabilities. The goal is always to have more assets, and you should, as long as the only debt you have is a mortgage, because typically they won't let you borrow more than, 80% on a house, or 90 depending on the situation. So you should have some level of balance that's of value in your house. Unless you're talking like, what caused the financial crisis back a while ago, where they were letting people pay interest only, and then, you got all that kind of stuff. But that typically doesn't happen. Okay, so we talked about that, and then we talked about how it also, as part of this, is goals are important when you're dealing with this. So that's where we were at. Basically, as far as financial goes, there's two types of goals in general, short-term and long-term. Short-term goals would be things like, I have a credit card bill, I want to pay it off. I want to purchase a car this year, so I'm saving for the car. I want to make a special contribution to the Walk for Water this year. Hopefully, something like that would be good. Speaking of, did we get anything more this week? I didn't check with you this morning. Nothing more? Okay. All right. So those kind of things would be like short-term goals. Long-term goals. What would be a long-term goal for someone that you guys can think of? Does anybody have a long-term goal? Retirement. Okay. Say, I want to retire with this much money in my account, and so I'm saving for that. Can be long-term. It may not be long-term depending on how old you are. And how no, we don't know that, so that's kind of a tough one to say exactly. Yep.
Yeah, college funds.
College funds if your kids are young. Yep. Things for something in the future. I want to have my house paid off in 10 years. I want to buy a new house 10 years from now. I want to be debt-free 5 years from now. Those kind of things are more long-term, or can be more long-term in nature. So questions, I have a list here of a few questions that we might want to ask when we're considering our financial condition and making our goals. And the first one is, what is my philosophy toward money? Am I more concerned with now, or would I like to save more for the future? Now then, it's interesting because Jimmy and I talk about this sometimes, and it's been mentioned from up here. Preachers are notorious for the now. Like, just give me enough to make it by right now. And they don't think about the future. I know that's the way my dad was, and I think that's the way a lot of preachers are. And that can cause problems, because if you don't save for the future, at some point you may not be able, now preachers don't retire. I keep saying that. They don't retire. They keep on going. But at some point, you may not be able to physically do anything, and you may not get a paycheck. So if you don't have anything saved, and especially I don't know that this is the case anymore, but especially for preachers who elected off of Social Security.
I was going to say that's a pretty significant number too.
Yeah, because they're not going to be getting any of that supplemental whenever that happens. So that's especially a big deal. If you're self-employed, typically you have to pay into Social Security, but as a preacher, was a special exemption. I don't know that that's the case anymore. I remember that they changed that to some degree. I don't know if you probably know more.
I really don't.
Okay. I'm not sure what the rules are on that, but anyway.
I think you can still opt out.
You can still opt out?
They ever changed that.
I know that if you had opted out before, you could continue to opt out, but I didn't know if the new minister.
Opt back in.
Right.
Once you opt out, you can never opt back
So-
into Social Security again.
In my dad's case, fortunately, he had already had enough work before he became a minister that he still had some Social Security, so that was good at least. But if you don't have any Social Security and you have no income stream,
Which also takes away your Medicare.
does it? I didn't know that. Okay, takes away your Medicare too. Yeah, then you're in trouble. So anyway, we should plan these things out, because you don't know. I mean, yes, it's good not to, we don't want to put our hope in earthly things, and that's, I think, where a lot of that comes from, and we count on God to give us what we need and all that sort of stuff. But you also are responsible for being able to care for yourself. And I think that's a very biblical principle that we've seen. So you want to take the steps to try to do that. All right, am I willing to make sacrifices to achieve my future goals? So a lot of people, if they have the money, they spend it right now, right? And a lot of, I forget what the percentage of Americans that live paycheck to paycheck is. It's fairly substantial. You know, we have a choice. We can either spend less than what we make right now and save, or you can spend it all. And so, you know, are you willing to make sacrifices to save or to achieve your future goals? If you're in debt, do you owe too much? And, you know, is your debt payment above 15% of your take-home pay? Something to consider as you're thinking through these things. I won't even talk about how much our country owes as far as their take-home pay. Do I have anything to save in case of an emergency? Do I have anything saved? I hope I said that right. Do I have anything saved in case of an emergency? That should be like one of your top priorities. We talked about that, is you keep putting away until you get up to where 3 to 6 months is the general guideline of how much you should have in your bank account to cover for an emergency.
I told myself, pay yourself first.
Yeah.
When you get paid, you pay yourself first.
Yep, put something away. Then, of course, am I saving enough for retirement, like we were just talking about? Good guidelines, 10%. Just like with giving, good guidelines, 10%, right? How much risk am I willing to take? What's your risk tolerance whenever you're talking about how much you're putting into things? And of course, along with that also comes age, because as most of you know, stocks are considered riskier. The riskiest is investing in one company. Then the next thing would be stocks, whereas usually bonds and other more fixed income is considered safer. But what's your risk tolerance? What's your time horizon? Because the market goes down, but it also comes back up. I think over the last 5 years, the market did this, and then it's done this. So, you know, if you have, as long as you don't want to time it, as long as you're contributing along the way, you're okay with that. It doesn't matter. But if you're closer to retirement, or if you're in retirement, you may not be able to ride that wave. So you got to consider that. And then, do I have enough insurance? If you have family counting on you, if you have liabilities, those kind of things, you might need to have insurance, which is also a cost, as we talked about, but you have to consider that. So all those things should be considered as you're looking at your financial condition and as you're making your goals. And you should have goals. I think it's better to have goals than to just kind of blow with the wind and let the wind blow you around and just go with whatever happens. It's better to have those goals. All right, so now we're going to talk budgeting, and I've already used like half of our class, so I don't know how far we'll get through budgeting. But let's read Luke 15:11 through 17, which is a great example of somebody who did not budget properly.
And he said, a man has 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of this estate that falls to me. So he divided his wealth between them. And not many days later, the younger son gathered everything together and went on a journey to a distant country. There he squandered his estate with loose living. And then when he had spent everything, a severe famine occurred in that country, and began to impoverish. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, and he sent him into the fields to feed swine. And he would gladly fill his stomach with the pods that the swines were eating, and no one was giving him anything to him. But then he came to his senses and said, how many of my father's hired men have more than I have enough bread, but I am dying out here with hunger?
Okay, so everybody I think here is probably familiar with the prodigal son. Of course, we usually talk about how that is where we can do wrong and then come back to God, and God accepts us, right? But as far as the money part of this goes, what did the prodigal son, or what could he have done instead of what he did?
Left it alone.
Well, he could have left it with his father and gotten a lot more, right? It sounds like his father was pretty wealthy. I mean, that's the way you read it, sounds like. So he probably could have gotten a lot that way. If he was going to take it, what could he have done with it? Could have invested it and lived off the earnings, right? I mean, that's what you do in retirement usually. Whatever you saved up, you live off the earnings for the most part, hopefully. He could have done that. Instead, what did he do? He squandered it. He just spent it. He probably had a lot of friends for a little while there while he was spending his money, right? And then, no more friends after once he didn't have any more money. Nobody to go to. So I think that's a classic example of not properly budgeting. He ended up with nothing. And a lot of people, different scope, but a lot of people today, whatever they get, it's gone. They barely make it from paycheck to paycheck because they just spend it as it goes. So I think that's, we can spend money far too quickly. Let's go to Proverbs 21, 17 through 20. I think we've read this passage a couple times. In fact, I read it this morning, the last part of it anyway.
He who loves pleasure will become a poor man. He who loves wine and oil will not become rich. The wicked is ransom for the righteous, and the treacherous is in the place of the upright. It is better to live in desert land with a content and a vexing woman than is precious treasure and oil in the dwelling of the wise. But a foolish man swallows it up.
All right. So Solomon states that a foolish person devours all their living expenses, but the wise save some, right? That's basically a translation of that, loosely. Also, he adds that those who love pleasure, wine, and expensive foods and other such things what will happen to them? They'll become poor. That's not always the case, but a general principle, like if you live above your means is what I think, how I translate that. If you spend more than what you have, you're going to become poor, right? One of the most basic requirements of successful money management is the need to control our spending and do it intelligently and wisely. The goal is not to waste our money and then look back saying, where did it all go? Right? You don't want to I don't know what happened to it. You don't want that. And a fundamental factor that can help us to control, or a tool that can help us to control our spending is the use of a budget. A budget can help us to determine how much we plan to spend versus how much we have coming in. And that's where it gets a little tough. The first part of it, I don't think people would have, it can be difficult, but I don't think they would have too much trouble, and that's developing the budget, right? Developing a budget isn't all that difficult. We'll go through that process here a little bit. But the key, and I'll emphasize this more as we go here, is that you then have to see if you kept to your budget and track it and keep to your budget. And that's where it gets a little more complicated or difficult. You may not like the idea of a budget because you may feel it puts pressure on you to meet it, or and feel like it causes anxiety. However, I think it causes more anxiety whenever you don't have enough to pay the bills later on. And a budget is meant to be a tool that helps us to use our money wisely, not to feel pressured. And a budget can help someone to learn discipline. Now, we talked about that. We're supposed to be disciplined in our lives, right? Whenever it comes to what we eat, what we drink, how we deal with people, all those things. Same thing with money. We're supposed to be disciplined. A budget can help someone learn to discipline overspending and keep us living in our means. And it can also help us to have some idea of where we are in establishing the goals that we talked about. And it helps us to make reasonable goals as well. Like, you don't want to set a goal that you're going to save $1,000 a month when you don't even have that much, when that's not even possible. You don't want to set unreasonable goals. You want to set things that you can actually keep to. The statement of financial condition that we went over earlier, assets and liabilities, gives you an idea of where our position is at any particular point. So you know where you stand right now if you do one of those. And it helps us to see areas where we need to improve to meet our goals. So in other words, if you're saving for retirement and your 401k plan or whatever your retirement vehicle is, IRA or whatever, isn't there, you're behind. in that case. So it helps us to see if we're meeting our goals, but the budget will help us to pinpoint what we can do on a more current basis, on a monthly basis, to meet those goals. So in order to make a budget, you have to have an idea of what you're spending money on and what that is every month or year. So what we're going to do is group some expenses into some different categories, and there are three main categories that are broken into as far as their frequency. You got monthly; those are the easy ones, right? You know how much, or should be the easy ones, I hope. You know how much you spend a month in general on utilities, food, or at least you can find that out fairly quickly. But you also have to keep in mind, what about things that have to be paid quarterly? What kind of things might be paid quarterly? If you're a business. Business is sales tax, yeah. Some insurances are quarterly. They can also be annual or semi-annual. Taxes are semi-annual, yep. Taxes are semi-annual. Then you also have annual, like what things that are only paid once a year. I'm not sure how many things fall into that category. Maybe an insurance, life insurance. We pay our life insurance once a year. House insurance can be semi-annual or annual. So anyway, you have to, when you're doing a budget, you have to calculate all these things in, because if you only do, oh, here's my monthly expenses, you may be leaving out some pretty big chunks of the other things that are going to come due. Another categorization deals with how much control you have over the expense. So what is a fixed expense? What's it sound like?
Utilities.
Yeah.
Something that recurs.
Well, actually, those are, what do you call those? Not.
Are they considered variable?
They would be variable, but they're not controlled. They're not within. You know you're going to have them. You can't stop them. And I'm trying to think of the word now. I lost the word. I'll think of it somewhere along the way here. But anyway.
Your bill will fluctuate from month to month too, what you pay.
Yeah, like your electric is going to probably vary depending on whether it's summer or winter, or it can. Especially if you use, like what you use for cooling or heating. If you use electric for cooling, if you use oil or gas for heating, like those things are going to vary depending on the month. But that makes me mad that I can't think of the word right now. But you're going to have to pay them. You don't have a choice in the matter. They're not optional. And I'll think of the word somewhere along the way here. It's really frustrating that I can't think of it. But anyway, and then you have variable expenses, and those are expenses that change from month to month, but you do usually have some level of control. For instance, electricity. You're going to pay electricity, but in the summertime, if you turn your thermostat down to 65, and you use electricity to cool, it's going to cost you more than if you turn it up to like 76 or 78, right? So you have some level of control over that, but you're going to pay it. You're going to have to pay something. What's an example of here's an example of the expense that I can't think of the word for. Cable. You have a choice as to whether you have cable or not, right? So cable could be a monthly fixed expense, or you could get rid of it and not have any expense there. So those are ones.
Like a luxury or an option or something like that.
What's that? Yeah, well, anyway, you can choose whether you're going to have it or not, is what I'm getting at, and I can't think of the word that I always use for that, but that's just dumb on my part to not think of it. So let's pull up the PDF of the sample budget that I have there. Oh boy, it's a little small. That's the Excel sheet. Okay, yeah, do the PDF of it. Yeah, the Adobe one. Yeah. There, you can see that a little better. So this is a really rough example of a budget. It's old. I didn't update it, and I didn't even really look at it for accuracy, but I think it's pretty good. This is part of an Excel sheet which Dave just had up that is linked all the way through, and you, like, I'm not going to get into using it, but some people can use, there's different software that you can use to track your budget if you want. Some are more automated than others. This is one that we did that has like, if you saw what Dave briefly pulled up, there's like monthly things that you can track all your different expenses and your income and all that. But what you need to start with for your budget is, and I don't know why I didn't put my notes this way. Yeah, I don't know why. You need to start with your revenue. How much do I have coming in? Actually, I know why I didn't, because I have another page for it. So yeah, you need to determine your income. Now then, there's a couple of things to think about. I show this is just the summary on a year to date, but you can almost have a page like this for each month, and you have to have enough cash in your account, like in the months that one of those insurance bills comes in, you have to have built up enough in your account to pay for that insurance unless you have excess income in that month, right? So like if in June, I know I have some kind of an annual payment that comes in to me, and I know I have an annual payment that I have to make, maybe those offset. But if it doesn't, then I have to account for that extra expense that's going to come in June. When you're doing your income, I would not count for things that are not certain. Like when you're doing your budget, you only account, I know that there's nothing certain, like you could lose your job and you may not have an income, but assuming that you keep your job, you count on what your monthly income is for that job. You don't count bonuses that you're expecting because you don't know, or anything else like that. It's just purely what you know is coming. And that's what you would put in for your month. You may have interest, you may not, depends on whether you have investments that are making money. You may have reimbursements, miscellaneous, but the big thing is you know what your typical income is going to be, and that's what you put in there for your month. Then you, as we talked about, what should come off the top? Savings should come off the top. I'll talk about why we don't have that this way on this spreadsheet. You may want to put it in here as a line. It just depends on how you want to do it. Savings and giving should be right there at the top. Usual guideline, 10% each. We'll talk more about that from a giving perspective when we do that in a little bit here, toward the end of the lessons. And then come your fixed items: mortgage, car insurance, housing insurance, life insurance, other insurance, and auto loan. Those were some things that we had there. Once again, if you subscribe to Ramsey, no auto loan should be up there. In that, as far as the insurances go, those may be, this is why I'm showing it annually, but if you're doing monthly, you may not have an insurance payment in the month. But you should, if you're following a budget, you should be, and you're accounting for it monthly, you would hopefully have enough at the bottom of the spreadsheet that's going into the account for that use later. If you scroll down just a little bit, next items are your utility bills that we talked about. These are, items that you are going to pay, assuming that you have them, but they're not always the same. They may vary a little bit depending on what time of year it is or what you're dealing with. Scroll down a little bit more. These are more items that you probably have to pay for the most part. Food, cleaning supplies, clothing, all the necessities that we have. Once again, variable depending on what you have. Necessity is one of the words that I was talking about. You got necessities versus non-necessities. That's still not exactly the word I was thinking of, but we're getting there. We're getting closer. Luxury maybe is what, luxury. You were talking about that. Yeah, more luxury, yeah. That's getting closer too. And then transportation, maintenance, there again, still not luxury items, necessities for the most part, depending on what you're dealing with. And then you get down into items that are we have more control over. Subscriptions. These days, now when this budget was done, subscriptions weren't as big of a deal. Nowadays, you subscribe to all kinds of streaming services and all kinds of stuff, right? I've even seen apps to help you cancel your subscriptions that you didn't know were out there. I don't know how you wouldn't know that you have a subscription. I mean, unless you're not checking your bank account and not seeing that the money's coming out. But anyway, subscriptions, gift cards, gifts to others, whatever, vacation, entertainment, all those kind of things. Those are more variable and things that you can control much more so than miscellaneous items. Then at the bottom, this is where your net surplus, like if you wanted a savings line, you'd already have it out of there, and then your bottom line would already include the savings. Here, this would be whether you're putting in the savings or not, basically, at the end, with what you get at the bottom. Like I said, those numbers are just generic. They're not reflective of anybody's real life situation here, but just an example to throw through there. So if you're looking at the numbers, don't pay attention to them, but more the expense types and what we're doing. So you got to figure out your income, then you got to figure out your expenses. Let me bounce back because now I've got two different things going on here. Where'd it go? There it go. So, all right. So in this worksheet up here, you see that the expenses are going to fit into one of those categories that we talked about: monthly, quarterly, annual, and they're going to fit into fixed or variable, necessity or non-necessity, or necessity, luxury. Maybe those are the words I'm looking for, and I'm just not thinking that way. I don't know. But anyway, the fixed expenses hopefully aren't too difficult to fill in. They may require some research, depending on how familiar you are with your financial situation, but you should be able to figure out how much those amounts are. And of course, like we just went through, they would include items like your mortgage, loan payments. Variable expenses are things that you have some control over: food, clothing, utilities, but those are still necessities. And you can budget similar to fixed expenses in that you can see historical information for those. Expenses that you may have some trouble with and that may surprise you will be those little extra expenses. I like to talk about people going to Starbucks, things like that you don't realize you don't realize how much you spend, spending that $7-8 bucks.
Oh, they're looking at me and I'm like, Emma's at a cake all the time.
So you spend $7 or $8 bucks here, and then there, and then there, and what's that add up to a month?
I think of Kevin O'Leary. Kevin O'Leary famously says, if you're making $60,000 and you're spending $6 on a coffee, you're stupid.
But yet we do, right? Some people, or at least we do some. Hopefully not too much. So what you have to include all those things. You got to include those little things. How much are you willing to do that per month? And you have to hold yourself to that whenever you say, okay, I'm willing to spend $100 a month for this sort of stuff. Then you have to hold to it. And you may burn through that in the first 5 days, depending on what you do.
We do that. So we calculate, we have our spending money, and sometimes we do burn through it in the first week. And then we do not spend another dollar for the rest.
And that's where discipline comes in. You have, if you've done that, if you've set, this is what I'm willing to do, then you can't go over it. And we teach our kids, it's okay to spend a little bit of money on something for yourself. Once again, set properly, but what happens? Especially I'll tell you what, these online games and stuff now, they get you because you don't spend. It doesn't cost you anything to play the game initially, but then they charge you for whatever you want to do in the game, and you can easily quickly get up. I've heard of people spending thousands of dollars on those games. It's a pretty good scheme actually. Rather than charging you to buy the game and get one-time fee, you get an ongoing stream of revenue. Anyway, I'm off on a tangent again. The only reason I say that is that it's okay to spend some money on those games if you want. If you've set the limit and you know how much you have to do with that, because that would be just like any other personal fun type thing. If your hobby is hiking and hiking's not a good, well, it could be a good example. Camping or whatever. How much money are you willing to spend on gear, over the course of a year? If you have a pet, how much money are you willing to spend on your pet over the year? All those things come into play as you're thinking through this. So in establishing your budget, you should compare the amounts you are actually spending with what you want it to be. That's where it gets hard. You got to do the comparison. For instance, if you have a goal of giving 15% and you're only giving 10, where do I need to cut in order to be able to get 15? What do I need to do? So we'll close up. We're out of time, but we'll close up with this question. How can filling out a budget help you in establishing your goals? Well, I just kind of gave you a little bit, right? It can show what's a reasonable amount of debt to pay in a year. It can show areas that you can change, where you have control, and it can show how much money you're actually spending on things, and whether you're spending things where it's most important or where it's not important. Like, like on
Leary, sir, I'm going. Keep the kids alive in my class.
like on $7 or $8 coffees or whatever. Okay, so all right, so we'll pick up there next week, finish up talking about budgeting and get into, I forget what my next thing is, but we'll get into something else then next week. All right, we'll be back for worship in just a few minutes.